Good morning, everybody, or in some people in different parts of the world, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for our fifth Project Lemonade webinar. My name is Wayne Cozzolino. I'm a Digital Transitions Cultural Heritage Sales Manager. And before we get on with Julie McVey, our special guest speaker from the National Geographic Library and Archives, I just want to go over quickly with you guys just essentially who Digital Transitions is. We are four divisions. We have a commercial division. We have a industrial division. We have our newest division, which is Pixel Acuity, our service bureau, and of course, our Digital Transitions Cultural Heritage division. Our focus for all of these is to treat our customers with the highest level of satisfaction, and we always want to make sure that we're taking good care of our customer base and our clients. One of the ways that we do this, or several of the ways we do this, is through online trainings such as this, as well as providing in-person trainings when COVID-19 crisis just passes and goes away. And speaking of that, I hope you all are practicing your social distancing at this point. We really want to flatten this curve across the world. We also sponsor many conferences, including IS&T, Smithsonian events, as well as having our own roundtable events throughout the country yearly. One of the things I wanted to acknowledge is my cultural heritage team in this, and part of that will be a slide that I'll introduce, but the cultural heritage team is basically a group of folks from R&D, as well as our technical sales team, which is available throughout the country. So we have extended hours. We also are partially responsible for creating software through the Phase 1 platform with the cultural heritage software. And combined, we have hardware, software, creating very robust, easy to use project and programmatic systematic systems that are easy to use. We are truly dedicated to the cultural heritage market space. Let me just introduce our team and go ahead and do this. Let me see if I can get this right. Okay, here's my team. Peter Siegel, who is our founder and director. Mike Chan, Jerry Ward, and Carol Wilczewski are our regional sales rep, as well as I am. Also want to acknowledge Kate Stone, our events manager and producer of the webinars. She's just been doing these tirelessly. As I've mentioned, this is our fifth one. So thank you and hooray for Kate. And also Spencer Zitterich, who will be providing the webinar support, as well as being very responsible for all the color management and profiling that we've been doing in conjunction with National Geographic. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring in Julie McVey and Renee Braden from National Geographic Library and Archives.
My cat decided to join you. Sorry.
Hey, there we go.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening.
Good morning, Julie, and good morning, Renee. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this, as well as thank you for National Geographic for providing you guys, allowing you guys to do this. If you don't mind, I'm going to read both of your bios and then ask you a few questions, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, great. So Renee Braden is the Senior Director of the Library and Archives at the National Geographic Society. She is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the staff, services, collections, products, and other activities of these areas. She holds a BA in European History from Mary Washington College and an MA in European History from George Mason University. Renee works on a variety of editorial content and special projects, gives heritage tours and talks, and does original historical research, interpretation, and analysis of the collections. And Julie holds an MA in American History and MLIS in Archives and Digital Curation from the University of Maryland. In her current role, she spearheads the NGS Library and Archives efforts to digitize and provide access to the Society's 130 years of scientific research, exploration, and photography. She is a board member of Digital Cultural Heritage DC, and her professional interests include exploring cultural heritage, color management, post-custodial archival practices, and expanding archival access through technology. Both very impressive resumes. So before we go on with the presentation, Julie and Renee, question for you, Julie. So how did you get to National Geographic?
How did I get to National Geographic? So in regards to education and training background, is that?
Sure, just how you got there. Like maybe that's a question for Renee to answer.
Yeah, I think Renee should probably start off and talk a little bit about how the project was conceived.
Yeah, no problem. So the Geographic is 132 years old or young, depending on which day it is, and has amassed really, really large collections for a scientific educational institution. Certainly not in the category of Smithsonian or something like that, but we have almost 12 million images. We have almost 1 million feet of moving picture footage, a rare book collection, a historical map collection, probably 8 to 10 million documents in the Scientific Documents Archive. So through the Society's grant-making activities and publishing and educational activities, it's amassed all of these collections. For the most part, over the Society's history, those materials were used by the Society itself. The Society is really good at reusing its own material. But never one to leave well enough alone. I wanted the collections to do more. And we serve external customers as possible, but I wanted to really push that out. So sometimes covertly, sometimes overtly, we began this process, and we were able to get the funding, to get digital setup from Wayne, and hire some people to really look at the archives with a fresh eye and to work towards bringing it to scholars, to educators, to students all over the world. So Julie and I are partners in crime in that activity. And I think Wayne and I both think Julie is a genius. And she's and she and her team have done a remarkable job. And you're gonna dive into the weeds of NGS photography with her today.
Yeah. So that's a great overview, just a little bit about what I do. So I'm the manager for the Digital Preservation Archive. We've been around since, I think the team all came together summer 2018, we all coalesced, and we've been working really hard. So it's 4 of us that are on kind of full time on that project. And then plus we work a lot with Renee and with our senior photo archivist, Sarah. And so with the 6 of us, we kind of conceived of how we're doing our digitization workflows, digitizing mostly still documents and images, and then trying to upload those into our DAM that will eventually become available to the public.
Great. And so my next question is, so you kind of answered it a little bit, but what is the library's function within the rest of the institution?
So the Society has multiple publishing arms, broadcast media. We have given 15,000 scientific research grants over the course of our history. So at any given moment, we have anywhere between 600 and 700 people in the field all over the world doing scientific research. We have a large geography education outreach for curriculum development, teacher support, all of that. So within all of those, to support all of those activities, the library and archives serves as a research library. So people do content development, upfront research. Everybody does fact checking for all of the products and publications within the library. And the archives is the institutional repository of the history of the Society, but we also mine it for current content, and we keep republishing out of those materials.
Great. And then the last question I have, and this is specifically for Julie, your presentation is on ICC profiling for Kodachrome and Ektachrome. in a few words, can you give us an indication of the volume of material you have that would make this such an important endeavor for you in National Geographic Library and Archives?
Sure, yeah, and I get into this a little in the presentation. We have in the neighborhood of 9 million 35 millimeter color slides, which is the majority of the photographic collection. So most of those are Kodachrome and Ektachrome, probably leans more to the majority Kodachrome. So this was obviously something that was a really important endeavor for us. So we'll get into that. Yeah.
Great. So without further ado, I'm going to shut myself down, and Julie, I'm going to let you take over. Thanks, everybody. Speak to you soon.
All right. Hi, everybody. Let me go ahead and get everything set up here. Can everybody see my screen? All good? Okay. So as Renee and Wayne and all of us talked about, we are the National Geographic Society. You guys probably are familiar with National Geographic magazine, which was for many, many years a publication of the National Geographic Society. It started out as a scientific research journal and then morphed into something more, which we'll get into. And I'm here representing the Digital Preservation Archive, which was a project that started summer 2018. And so we are, as we previously mentioned, a staff of 4 full-time people working on that project versus 12 million photographs, several million documents. So we have quite a ways to go in all of our work. So I just wanted to start this off to give a little bit of National Geographic's very colorful history, if you will. Color photography is obviously one of the hallmarks of the Society's history, especially when it comes to the magazine. So National Geographic magazine began adding photographic images to the journal as early as 1889, and they were using photographic series in the magazine by 1905. And the first color photographs, which were hand-colored photos of China and Korea, were published in the November 1910 issue, and they proved extremely popular with readers. From the very beginning, the photography was very popular for the readership, but it was a little controversial at first with the board because they wanted this to be a serious scientific journal, and they didn't see photography as a serious scientific medium at that point. And so at the time, the editor, Gilbert Grosvenor, later president, he decided that the magazine should definitely focus on publishing more color illustrations. Once again, controversial choice with the board. A lot of the founders weren't really happy with that. But I think in the end, we can all agree he made the right call. So the first natural color photograph, so one that was an autochrome instead of something that was hand tinted, appeared in the July 1914 issue. And around that time, so this is the photograph here, it's a flower garden in Ghent in Belgium. And then right around that time, by 1915, the Society really commits to photography and starts building its own in-house photographic staff and lab. So these staff photographers ended up pioneering several photographic firsts. So that includes the first photographs underground, first color photographs underground, which you can see here in this cave, the first color photographs under the sea of fish and coral reefs, and the first from the air. So the majority of the color photographs in that early era, in the early 20th century, that appear in NGM are autochromes. So that was the process developed by the Lumiere brothers in 1905, patented in 1907. But as new processes were introduced or improved upon, we also see the photographers using Jufe color, Finlay color, Agfa color, some of the other competitors. But the entire point is they're pretty committed to exploring the newest and best in photographic technology at this time. But until the mid-1930s, glass plate color photography was really the only viable option. Obviously, it was very cumbersome and difficult to take that out into the field. So they were always looking for better ways to do things. So enter Louis Martin. So Louis is kind of the progenitor of our Kodachrome revolution, as we like to think of it, at National Geographic.
Hey, Julie. I think
Yes.
I'm going to take and see if we can get a little bit better quality if I share my screen with folks. I'll share.
Oh, please do. Yeah.
So give me a second to pull that up.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry about that, guys.
All right, and we are from Kodachrome Revolution, and bear with me, folks. We'll go to slideshow and play from here. Okay. Okay.
Okay. Do we need to go back to the previous slide at all? All good? I
Think we're good.
think we're good. Okay, perfect. And can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay, good deal. Sorry, I'm using my headphones because there are a lot of children. There's a playground like right behind my house and it's very loud. So, okay, good deal. All right. So here we are with Louis Martin, correct?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Good deal. All right, let's get started again. Sorry, guys. So Louis Martin is one of our very prolific photographers at the National Geographic Society. He worked there for decades and becomes one of the most well-known photographers in the business. But way back in 1934, he started at National Geographic at the age of 20. Fun fact, he actually lied on his resume and said he was 26 because he didn't think they would hire someone so young and inexperienced, and he was probably right. But anyhow, he began very young. He began his career there as a developer working in the lab. So as back in the day, you started at the bottom rung and worked your way up. So that's exactly what he did. So he was developing all of that Kodachrome, or not the Kodachrome and Ektachrome, but the autochromes and Dufay color, Finlay color, all of those glass plate processes. But he did have an interest in color film technology, and he had kind of an interest in seeing how that evolved. And so that's something that he brought into his job as well. So Martin first encountered the 16mm motion picture Kodachrome in 1935, right when it came out. And so according to him, he saw the writing on the wall that this was the future of color photography. And so when Kodachrome became available in 35mm format, Martin basically wrote to the Eastman lab and bugged them until they sent him a few rules to try before it was originally released. So he got his hands on it, took several sample shots, including this image of his future wife riding in Rock Creek Park in DC, you see here in the middle. He developed those and convinced the higher ups to review them. So at first they're pretty skeptical because of course they're so small, they're worried about being able to print in the magazine. But eventually Martin does prevail when the National Geographic magazine color engraver decided he could actually work with Kodachromes to make even better color plates than he could do with the larger format glass plates like the Autochromes and Finlays and all of that. So Louis won. And although he allegedly shot the first Kodachrome on assignment in 1936, that was not published. But the first Kodachrome images to make it to publication were shot by Bob Moore in Austria. That's the image to the far right of the people dancing in the street. Those were shot in 1937 and published in April 1938. And obviously this was revolutionary because you could not, capture people in motion with these previous glass plate processes. It was much too cumbersome. The exposure time was much too long. You had to have perfect lighting, all of that. But with Kodachrome, they could really, capture the world in motion as it was. So it was really exciting for a magazine like National Geographic. So by 1940, Nat Geo had really embraced Kodachrome, started publishing more and more color photos from all over the world. Once Ektachrome came out in, I think, around 1945, 46, it was also pretty commonly used by NGM photographers. So on through the decades until the advent of digital. So that's how we ended up with approximately 9 million 35mm color slides. So once again, that's the majority of our approximately 12 million photographs. And the vast majority of those are Kodachrome and Ektachrome. Next slide, please, Spencer. Cool. Okay. So to switch us back into the present, when we first set up our project, we were using an instant capture system. We have the phase 1 IHG 100 megapixel camera, the DT photon LED lights, and overall color management on that system is pretty tight, especially for reflective and especially in comparison with flatbed scanners I've used. And so I think we mostly knew that, you know, people have done Kodachrome and Ektachrome profiles for flatbed scanners for years, but we didn't immediately see the need to do that with our current setup with reflective. And I'm actually going to hand things over to Spencer for just a second so he can explain the profiles that DT has created with that for use with that system.
All right. So let me just pull this thing back up. Just a little bit of a glitch here going on. Okay, great. So basically, what we sort of saw was, you know, the color gamut that exists in the Kodachrome film or the Ektachrome film is just very, very specific. You know, there's a reason that people talk about, you know, the look, the feel, you know, so often about these film stocks. The colors were just very, very specific, very, very, very individual, right? So what we took a look at was, by digitizing this film with a color profile that may have been, you know, tailored towards the colors and tones that we might exist in reflective materials, works on paper, paintings, etc. We found that maybe we could better characterize the colors in that film by actually profiling a Kodachrome target, profiling an Ektachrome target. So, you know, we decided to just kind of go straight to the source and try and track down one of those targets.
Yeah, so as Spencer said, that's kind of, we were in discussions with them, you know, as we were developing our program and really trying to, so we started out doing reflective stuff and then switched over to our transmissive workflows to add those in as well. So while we were doing that, we were in conversation with DT, with Spencer, and with some other institutions as well. Library of Congress gave us a lot of help and a lot of feedback very kindly. And so we decided, you know, it was probably worth it to try to track down a Kodachrome target. Can you go to the next slide?
Okay.
Thank you. So the challenge to that, 2 more clicks. As many of you probably know, Kodachrome stopped being produced and developed in, I think, 2012. So it immediately, like right after that, became very difficult to get a hold of a Kodachrome target because no one made them anymore. So the ones that were in the world became a pretty hot commodity. People tended to hold on to them. And so we had a pretty hard time trying to track one down. We spent months just looking around the internet for one of these things to no avail. Finally got a tip off from someone that I think someone in Germany was selling like 8 on eBay for kind of an exorbitant price. So we had to go to Renee and make our case. And begged her to let me buy one of these Kodachrome targets. But we, did the cost benefit analysis and decided it was worth purchasing at least one just to try it to see, if this worked for us as well as it would work for other people. And so invested in that Kodachrome target. And then the good news with the Ektachrome target is that we actually got, I think, 2 of those 4x5 and a 35 millimeter from a colleague who had been working in the building for like 30 years. He'd started out in the development lab and we still had one of those. So we just like kind of had these Ektachrome targets in his desk and they ended up being in good enough shape to use. So we were very fortunate in that. And I think the Kodachrome target that we have is a silver fast target. I don't think it was made by Kodachrome. I would have to double check on that.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Cool. All right, so next slide. So we initially tried a few open source solutions, but could never really get the profiles to look quite right. I'm not entirely sure if that was the nature of the software or just my own inexperience in trying to profile things or just a combination therein. But eventually we called up Spencer and DT and enlisted their expert help. So Spencer came down for a day and we used basic color. I say it was mostly Spencer. We used basic color to create both the Kodachrome and Ektachrome ICC profile. Spencer, do you want to talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, definitely. So one of them, I think the biggest reason that I really felt excited and comfortable going down the path of creating a profile, with Julie for the Kodachrome was that the targets that they were able to get their hands on came with individual target measurements. So that's the very, very important thing to keep in mind here. We had the Kodachrome target plus measurements for each individual patch laid out in XYZ and LAB color coordinates. So by including that in basic color input, we had done this in 5, but this is a screenshot just recently from 6. We were able to get a better profile for that target because we weren't using these average values. We were using the very, very specific values measured on the target. So basically that process in a nutshell looks like capturing an image of the target with your desired light source, white balancing to your light source, stripping the initial capture, the raw capture of any color profile and capturing it in with a linear tone scale so that you're basically embedding the color information just with white balance and whatever color information the camera sensor is getting. And by doing that, you can then take that unprofiled image of the target that is basically just representative of how the camera sensor sees it and give that to your color profiling software with your reference data that I mentioned in that XYZ and LAB coordinates, and it built a profile around that. And so that's sort of the view on the left here. And if you see on the right, what we have is, this is just this is a picture of me. I believe, yep, that's me. And we're basically doing a little bit of both perceptual color matching and, let's call it software or profiling based color matching. We want the color profiling software to do the bulk of the heavy lifting. But there are certain cases where we might need to tweak it a little bit, use the color editor in Capture One, and just really take a look at, okay, yeah, we built the profile, but now if we start applying it to the captures of the slides or of the transparencies, is it performing the way we would expect it to? So taking a look at some with before the new profile was applied, after the new profile was applied, looking at shadow detail, looking at highlight detail, and of course the colors too.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of the initial testing that we did. We have a few slides to kind of demonstrate the differences between the Kodachrome and Ektachrome profiles and then the original DT profile, and kind of what the differences are in that. So can everybody see that pretty clearly? Yes, no, maybe? Yep, okay, cool. Oh, yeah, you guys have the downloaded hand. That's wonderful.
Great.
Okay, perfect, good. All right, so follow along at home if you need to. All right, so we can kind of initially just immediately see, I think in this slide, that the shadow detail in the bottom really comes out a lot more clearly than it does with the original profile. So the way that we did this is we shot the slide both with the Kodachrome ICC profile or the Ektachrome ICC profile applied, and then we did a different shoot with the DT profile as the input, and just kind of compared the two, tried to make sure that the white balance and exposure were as similar as they could be, just to kind of see how they performed against one another. So just immediately the shadow detail really jumped out at us. We were really pleased with how that turned out. Do you want to switch? Yeah, the original is definitely a lot more saturated. And we kind of see that throughout these examples.
Yeah, I think just to address that one question real quick. Yeah, the saturation we do see when you see original profile versus the Kodachrome profile, it's definitely more saturated, but compared to the original object,
Right.
we were finding that real dark saturation was just coming from those much darker colors in the profile meant for reflective objects, was sort of bumping up the saturation in those darker hues, giving it that appearance of that real punchy nature. So okay, anyway, go on.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something that we see throughout our slide testing. So on this particular one, we definitely see a huge difference in the blues. That's kind of the most immediate thing that jumps out. To the right, it looks almost like kind of an indigo blue. To the left, it's a much more natural looking ocean blue, which is of course how it looks in the slide. We're comparing all of these, looking at the slide on a light box, and looking at the differences there. And we also see, once again, you just see a little more shadow detail in the ship, and the yellow is slightly different. So we are seeing a decent amount of difference here. Oh yeah, and I think we do just embed the Kodachrome and Ektachrome ICC profiles. Is that correct, Spencer?
Yeah.
Them as input profiles.
Yeah, that one. Do we embed the ICC profiles directly? Yeah, we are using this as a camera profile. This is an input profile rather than a transformation to a color space in post.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And so this is not from, those were from our space collection. So we were working a lot on the slides from our coverage of the Apollo missions in the 1960s. This is a slide from the 1950s from an expedition done in the Chesapeake Bay. As you can see, skin tone is something that is way, way different with the Kodachrome ICC profile. We see a lot more natural of a skin tone on the left. On the right, both look a lot more reddish. They almost look sunburned to me in this. And so that kind of jumped out to me that you could actually maybe even misinterpret a scene with the wrong profile applied. We want to move on. I think the next one is an Ektachrome. Yeah, totally. Okay. So the Ektachrome is a lot more subtle than the Kodachrome. I think Kodachrome is pretty well known for being a very finicky sort of film. The colors are much different. They're very much their own thing. So the Ektachrome is a lot less punchy. It's a lot more subtle. But even with that, we see a pretty substantial difference, especially in those shadows. You see those come out a whole lot more, kind of where this red circle is. And then up at the top where this kind of little like red tube thing is, and then you can kind of see a bit of a difference in the skin tones as well. That's something that jumped out at us. Will the profile help with Ecta that has shifted? Oh, good question. So we haven't actually come across a whole lot of shifted Ektachrome yet. We anticipate that that's absolutely something that we have in our collection that we know about. We haven't had time to address those collections quite yet. We're hoping that it helps with it, but right now we're not quite sure. So hopefully, we'll be able to do a little more research and use this in production a bit more and report back on that.
All right.
So continuing on, this is another Kodachrome image. So once again, with the saturation, we see that the image to the right is much more saturated. The image to the left is less saturated, but once again, it looks a lot closer to the original slide. So that's, as a cultural heritage imaging project, our goal is not to get, the punchiest image, but it's to get the image that looks the closest to the actual object itself for the digital surrogate. So that's what we're aiming to do. Okay, and then once again, this is a slide from the 90s. So we tried to apply these to materials from different decades. So we did a lot in the 50s, 60s. I don't know if we found anything from the 70s and 80s. Hopefully we will in the future, but we have some from the 90s. So from the 90s, once again, still works pretty well. Once again, really, really apparent with the skin tone, with the reds, with the blues. I think you can see her hair a lot more clearly with the Kodachrome profile applied. So that really stands out. And we can answer the question about the quality control and delta E measurements, I think at the end probably.
Yeah.
If that's okay. Yeah, cool. So on this next one, so this is kind of an interesting case. So this is from the 1940s. It was shot in India. This is one of the cases in which the results were kind of mixed. So the Kodachrome profile really handled the greens and browns and whites, all the skin tones a lot better, a lot closer to the original slide. But the DT profile handled the blues a little better. So that blue is actually closer to what you see on the slide. And so that's an instance in which we did go in and use the color editor to try to kind of bump that blue up to where it needed to be. And we can talk about that a little bit later, a little bit about that process of building onto that ICC profile. But yeah, so it's not perfect, but it's getting us, a lot closer than we would have been otherwise. And then once again, one more Ektachrome here from the 1990s. Again, you can see it's a lot more subtle than the difference between the Kodachrome and the DT profile. But the red is a truer red to the left. It looks a little orangey with the DT profile applied. And I think we have like one more Ektachrome to show. Yeah. And so here, that's another one that highlights skin tone a little more. So with the Ektachrome, a little more neutral, a little truer to the original slide using the Ektachrome profile. Okay, and we'll also take the question about our workflow processes at the end. So there was one more subject I just wanted to cover really quickly, kind of with the history of color film. I think somebody asked this the last time I talked about it, so just kind of wanted to throw this in here. So you see a Shirley card here. So a lot of us who are aware of the photographic history probably know about these in the practice of film manufacturers and developers of balancing the colors in film to prioritize fairer skin tones. So that often meant, you know, photos of people with darker skin tones, photos where multiple skin tones are represented, like very literally kind of erase people of color. And that's something that as National Geographic, I feel like we have to be very sensitive to. So even though film manufacturers started addressing that issue beginning in the 1970s for a variety of reasons, so for cultural heritage digitization, that's something we really wanted to keep an eye on, to be able to make sure that we're able to do our editing to bring stuff out. So this particular use case is really important to us, and we did find that the Kodachrome and Ektachrome profiles, as we've seen throughout, really do help to mitigate some of that within the film. And I do want to kind of caveat all of this discussion, this entire case study, to say that Nat Geo's use of color film is very specific. We have a very particular use case, especially with Kodak, because we have a unique history with the Kodak company. So pretty early on in their photography development, Nat Geo had a really close relationship with Kodak and Kodak Film. We've come across some documentation in the archive about various quality standard film development practices, film use guidelines for photographers. And so that indicates to us that that was something that they were really keeping an eye on too, making sure that they got the best film for their personal use, for the magazine coverage, especially. And we, hope as we continue digitizing in the document archive that we'll come across more of this history and be able to really mine that for our own understanding of as we go along and digitize the film. So we do know that the photography department at Nat Geo had a practice of being really, really choosy with the film they purchased from Kodak, specifically when it came to Ektachrome film. And so what they would do is they would test film from different lots, different dye lots. And when they found one that they liked the best, that worked the best for the photography that they were doing, they would just purchase that entire film. And so, instead of a photographer going out and buying like 20 rolls of film or 50 rolls of film, they were buying thousands, I guess. And so as a result, we have probably a much more standardized collection of slide film than anyone else that I can think of, archivally speaking. So it's probably one of the most standardized collections in existence. And we have that reason to believe that a lot of our film was chosen with, things like skin tone and exposure needs in mind. And so we do realize that this is a very specific use case for doing any profiling that we've done. And then I think if you go on in the slide, Spencer, you see some of our own, we actually had our own test slides that they used for several years. And so we can kind of see the results of the Kodachrome profile using those. But yeah, so skin tone wise, we see, to the left of the Kodachrome handles that a lot better than to the right. Okay, and then just a couple last takeaways, before we open the floor to questions. I would say if anyone else is at an institution where you have a decent amount of color film, definitely do that cost-benefit analysis. What are your collection needs? What's the availability of the materials you would need to do this? Obviously, we are working with a lot of Kodachrome and Ektachrome. Other people might have other types of color film that I'm not as familiar with because our collection is so very specific. See what the availability is, for creating custom profiles, what the affordability is. That can definitely be a hurdle for a lot of cultural institutions. We understand that. So I think our main takeaway here, is if you can't create your own custom ICC profiles for your stuff, store-bought is fine, as Ina would tell us. But the important point is that you are doing color management and starting with a really strong background there. So as far as the profiles go, once again, they've been in production for a little less than a year. I think we started this in May of 2019. And of course, we're on hiatus right now, or else we'd be working with them right now. So the profiles do an absolutely perfectly accurate job every time. No, of course not. We all know that film chemistry has too much variation for that, but they do get us a lot closer to what the slides look like on the light table. And they do help us to produce the most accurate digital surrogate that we can get. And they make a really good starting point for any necessary color adjustments that we do in Capture One. So our production process is to use these profiles we've created to constantly keep track of how they handle the film that we're digitizing. We make notes when we need to do any corrections, and we, of course, implement those corrections very carefully in a controlled environment. So I think that's it from me. I think we're ready to answer some of the questions that we didn't cover throughout.
Some of those questions, it looks like we have about 10 questions. I think you answered a couple of them, but if we could just go through them for everybody.
Perfect, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So let's see here. There's another question. Let me mark that one. Let's see, let's sort by oldest. Okay, have you been using transparent or reflective targets? Julia, maybe you can add on to some of this if you'd like, but in my time working with National Geographic, we've done both reflective and transmissive profiling. So these are sort of two different topics, of course, but we do have in situ or custom profiles for both reflective objects and transmissives being employed at this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Let's see. Are these color-aid.de targets? So no, I don't believe they are. This is, I think, specifically the LaserSoft edition. From what I understand, the color aids are printed in that same style. I haven't specifically used them, but I know that I'm pretty sure that these are just two different producers. They're not the color aid ones. What tool do you use to make the target profile? That would be Basic Color Input. Basic Color being the sort of color, the company that deals with all things color management, and the one that I feel that really does a very strong job with the software that they're creating. Like I think I did mention that this was Basic Color Input 5 at the time. Just recently, Basic Color Input 6 was released early this year, around Q1, maybe late Q4 last year. That is a much improved software in that the Pro Edition does give you the opportunity to edit selectively let me see, you can edit the lab values, or essentially you're just editing the color profile for the grayscale ramp on a target, and usually the 12 most saturated colors on that target as well. So if you're finding that for some reason the capture is giving you a color profile that's not quite accurate in a couple places, the plus side of using a software like Basic Color Input 6 is that you can go in and edit that profile very easily if you have high delta E's in your tone scale or some of those highly saturated colors. Okay. Let's see here. Do you embed Ectochrome? Okay, so we did answer that one. Yes, we do apply these color profiles at Capture. In Capture One, for anybody who's using Capture One, this is in the base characteristics tab, so that profile, that ICC profile, is the thing doing the color transformation from that sensor data to what's displaying to you in Capture One.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. We answered the shift question about Ektachrome. We answered the ones. Okay, well, I don't know if this is answered yet, but it's marked as such. which of these profiles, original or Kodachrome, do you consider as referential in terms of quality control and delta E measurements? I certainly am, I think that the Kodachrome profile is going to be the better reference here.
Yeah, in production, that's how we've been using it. We've been using the Kodachrome profile as the referential one.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can see, if I sort of flip back to this screenshot here, it's pretty far back. Whoa, hello. Computer does not like me today. Okay, here we go. So
there we go.
It's a bit small, but in this profile, you can see that our maximum delta E value for the color profile was 6. Interesting little thing about basic color input is that you can drag this slider that you see with the percentage where it says 6 and then the slider and then a 100%. That's basically saying that 100% of the target patches have a delta E of 6 or less. When we dragged that down to about even 98, that number jumped down to somewhere around delta E of 2. So 90% of those color patches had a delta E of 2 or less. And then in the 50% range, 50% of those patches had a delta E somewhere in the ballpark of about 1.4, 1.5. So it did a very, very, very good job. And again, that is largely in part because we had the actual measured values for each of those color patches, in addition to making a capture that was good and well formed from the beginning.
Yeah, I don't think we would have moved forward with using either the Kodachrome or Ektachrome had it been less accurate than that. So
right.
Yeah, that was an important part of all of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, so digitizing 9 million slides, how much time do you spend doing that? And how many phase 1 cameras are you using?
Oh gosh.
Basic productivity numbers and
yeah,
you guys are using?
So currently we have 1 camera. If I had my way, I would, in the an unlimited budget, I would obviously fill up all the space available to me with cameras and people using them. Right now we are a team, I think I mentioned this before, of 4 people working on this full time. We have a couple of people who are able to spend some of their time on it. But when I say we're working on this project, I mean we're doing everything. So we're going in, we're creating our roadmap for how we're digitizing collections, we're doing the inventory, we're collecting the metadata, we're building the hierarchies, we're doing the digital imaging, we're doing the QA, we're doing the digital curation, uploading things into the DAM. So we're really doing the full cycle, the full preservation life cycle for everything that we touch. So obviously we're a pretty small team against a pretty large collection. So I would say, let's see, with the slides, I want to say we can get through in the neighborhood of like 400 to 500 a day, kind of with setup and making sure everything looks okay, with putting everything in our digitization log, making sure it matches up with our spreadsheets, kind of all the back end stuff that we have, once again, like 1 person typically doing. So that's $10. She's our digitization specialist. And then, of course, doing all the post processing. The post takes way more time than the actual digitization. So making sure to QA, check the colors, make sure everything looks good, make sure, there's no motion blur. Yeah, so we have, I feel like, instant capture allows us to do a lot more than, using a flatbed scanner or something. But obviously, we only have so much time and so many people who are able to make all this happen, and like a limited amount of, computer production capacity. So yeah, that's kind of where our bottleneck is. So hopefully, in the future, we'll be able to expand the project.
Let me jump in here real quick. We do have clients, particularly for-profit clients, that are doing upwards of 1,000 images a day. So just wanted to throw that in there as a number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we would definitely be in a different situation if we were strictly like a production studio, if we were the team that people were handing off to do just the digitization for, I think, instead of kind of doing that full project lifecycle. So I think it just, to answer the second question, I have 2 million slides. Any advice on how to make time more productive? It's just going to definitely depend on how many people you have working on things, what your organizational structure is, how much rehousing needs to happen. Those are all such variable factors that it's kind of hard to say without knowing a little bit more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the main things you can look at here is how well you can collate that collection and work within batch. Like Wayne and Julie were sort of talking about, if you're only focusing on image capture, those numbers could be significantly higher. If it's simply pulling something off the shelf, getting that batch of slides underneath the camera, and then photographing them, you would easily see 1,000 images a day. No questions asked. But when you talk about rehousing, or you talk about any of the sort of manuscripts, information on a slide, you might have to sort of decipher and write down and just look at that whole part of the workflow. Those are all things that, if you're a very, very small team, of course, like that's going to feed into your productivity and your efficiency. So, to be more productive is, just look at that workflow already. If you're already doing all the things we're kind of talking about, then bravo, that's awesome. But if you can maybe move towards little things like, are you using something like Capture One or a camera-based solution? Are you shooting in RAW, or are you using maybe a software that lets you edit things in batch? Like, maybe those are some of the sort of pain points in the pipeline that could be sort of done a little bit more efficiently and quicker. So.
Right. Yeah. And that's just to kind of make things clear. Like, if we had, someone standing for 7 or 8 hours a day just doing digitization, we could do way more than 400 or 500. That's only in a few hours. And that's a specific decision that we've made as a team, to not just like get completely snowed under with like the post work that we need to do and all the other different hats that we wear. Because as we're the library and archive staff altogether is about 15 people, and we do a lot of like library and archives reference too. So we have to make sure we're making time to do those parts of our job that aren't strictly digitization. So that's a workflow decision that we've made specifically for our team.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go on to the next question, which is, in Capture One Cultural Heritage, how do you export multiple slide frames with a different name? As in, when you are capturing more than one slide in a single capture. So that's a little bit more of like a very specific technical question. I'll answer it very briefly. But if you want to reach out to us, we can. If it doesn't quite answer your question, we can certainly talk about it. In this situation, you would want to rename your images upon output. I would imagine that you would use the next capture adjustments tool in Capture One and create, let's say you photograph 4 slides in one shot. You divide your capture area up into 4 quadrants. You'd create a variant for each of those 4 quadrants from that one image. That's your master image, or your primary variant, as it's called in Capture One. You would set your next capture adjustments to copy variants from primary. That means that every time you take a picture, Capture One will automatically create 4 variants for each of those 4 cropped quadrants that you've set up. So you can lay down 4 slides, make your exposure, Capture One makes 4 images, although it's all from one raw file. And then you do that over and over and over. You should then hopefully be able to rename sort of in batch later on using the output renaming tool. Can you share the values of the target that you got? I'm not quite sure which values you would be.
Like the lookup tables?
Yeah, if that's the lookup table or if it's the delta E values that we talked about previously, that I'm not sure of. So if you go ahead and ask maybe another question, or maybe you reach out to us again later, we can get you that information. If you use the raw format, can you attach profiles later on? Yes, technically speaking, you can. Is it best practice to attach later? I would say probably not. We do want to have that profile from the get-go so that when we're assigning that color profile to that raw image, we're seeing how that image is going to look on screen. We want to do some level of soft proofing. Now, granted, if you've already made captures of slides and then you want to go and create a color profile for that film stock and apply it later, it won't mean that your image is, not valid or not of good quality. You can definitely still get a great result from that. The caveat being, you need to have made sure that your raw capture was very, very, very well formed from the get-go, being that you aren't clipping any highlight or shadow detail. As long as that image raw data isn't clipped, if you add that color profile retroactively, you should be able to ideally just adjust your exposure and make a couple color tweaks and have it fall into place.
Yeah, so that is something that we've done with some of it. So before we worked with Spencer to implement these color profiles, we had done a few batches with the original profile that were from the same collection. And so we did make the decision just based on kind of preservation best practices and handling that we didn't necessarily want to bring those out and redo them. But we felt that because they were from the same collection and from around the same time period, from probably the same film stock, that we would be okay just kind of applying the profiles on the back end, specifically because we knew how slides that were very similar looked, using the ICC profiles as input profiles. So once again, that's you just kind of have to make those decisions based on your production capacity, how fragile things are, what your own best practices are, I think.
Great. Okay, so next question. How do you deal with the red cast from leftover silver in processing that varies from processing batch to batch?
Honestly, that's not a huge issue that we've seen. Once again, we have a very specific use case, and we're really, really fortunate to have very high quality processing in most of our materials. But I would say that we would probably use the color editor to correct any of that if we needed to.
Yeah, that's also what I'm thinking. A big part of this, as Julie's talking about, is that the nature of the volume by which these film stocks were acquired. So we would see significantly less, and we do see significantly less variation from image to image, and also year to year, and perhaps processing batch to batch, which I think that information's, I would assume, likely unavailable. Which film was processed when and what date and all that. But this situation is probably a lot different than if I was personally me, if I had a collection of Kodachromes
Yeah.
that I bought maybe, a handful of rolls every week or a couple months for 20 years. The variability is just different.
Yeah, that's way
So
different.
to address that as needed when you come across images that do look, perhaps too red, that can very easily be adjusted in batch in Capture One.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, so once again, to talk a little bit about our own history as an organization, the documentation we have is really, really thorough when it came to like processing practices. So like they were very, very exacting when it came to the development of the stuff that came through their own labs. So early on, of course, they sent it to Kodak for Kodachrome processing because they had kind of the monopoly on that. But I think it was in the 1950s that the Supreme Court ruled that Kodak couldn't keep a hold of that process anymore. So they had to let other people develop it. And we did, if I'm remembering correctly, we did a lot of our development in-house as an organization. So.
All right. So next question down the list, which is growing, it seems, by the minute here.
Yeah.
We have a question: can DT help to build the ICC profile database for Capture One and Phase One users? Yes, definitely. Yeah, we can help with all those sorts of things. We're happy to do any kind of consulting, and sort of help you out. If you are a client already, shoot us an email. If you're not a client, shoot us an email. We're very interested in this kind of stuff. So just reach out to us with your questions, and we can take it from there. How do you measure sharpness per slide or per batch?
Oh, do we measure sharpness per slide or per batch?
Yeah. Do you?
Kind
do you?
Yeah. So kind of a combination of both. So we have the transmissive targets that we use, at the beginning and end. And then we also just do kind of spot checks throughout. It would be, I think, time prohibitive and like handling prohibitive to try to do that with every single slide. That being said, we do QA. We do, QA everything at the end to make sure that the sharpness is good. But the system that we're using is really, really reliable. Like once you set it, you can generally be certain that it's gonna, like everything's gonna stay tight. And then when we've had issues with that, we've been able to work with DT to fix some stuff. But yeah, so like we'll probably check like every 50 or so slides just to make sure stuff is still looking good.
I just want to jump in, and the camera that Julie is using is the IXG camera. It is not a helical focused camera, so it is not prone to focus drift. So just wanted to add that.
Right. And those targets that you mentioned, those are the ISA transmissive targets.
Yeah.
Image Science Associates.
Yes.
Cool. Okay. Have you ever tried to measure your patch values on your own?
It's a big no for me. No.
Likely a big no for most people too. Densitometers are pretty expensive pieces of machinery, and very specialized. So to be able to do that in house, I mean, that'd be quite the shop. I don't know of anybody off the top of my head who has one.
Is that something you guys do, Spencer?
Say it again.
Is that something you guys do?
No, we do not have a densitometer. Probably not in the budget. I'm sure you could probably find you could maybe find somebody who might do it for you. I don't know what the cost might be to do something like that, but it's not like taking like an i1 Pro 2 spectrophotometer or maybe like a Konica spectrophotometer and measuring patch values on like a printed target or something reflective. It's a significantly more labor-intensive process and just requires more specialized machinery, if you will. Okay, is there any difference between capturing raw and applying ICC profile later rather than at capture?
I think we covered that, right? Okay, cool.
Yep. let's see, Roel asked, what file format or ICC profile do you archive image files in? Do you keep K/E for Kodachrome and Ektachrome ICC profile, or do you convert?
We follow the FAGI 2016 guidelines. So I think we're in Adobe 98 is the color space that we save things in archivally.
All right. Will DT incorporate these new profiles into their products? We are offering the color profiles up to everybody. Now, that being said, this is specifically a profile made with the Phase 1 IXG 100 and the DT Photon LED lights. So that's a pretty specific sensor and illuminant combination. We have seen very good results testing the profiles in-house with the Phase 1 150 megapixel sensor, with the Phase 1 50 cropped chip megapixel sensor. It's likely that you could use this profile as a sort of sniff test to what your camera might look like if you're using sort of like a modern CMOS sensor, especially if you're using a Sony camera. Just given who is making those sensors for the Phase 1 cameras, right? If you go ahead and apply that profile to an image that you've shot with a CMOS sensor camera and a good quality LED light source that does not have too much color contamination, either in usually like in the near IR or anything like that, good visible spectrum light, you should see okay results. I don't recommend it. It's not proper color management, but if you want to use that as a way to say, okay, what is my canned sort of generic camera profile doing for me now, and what might something that is sort of tuned to one type of light source and one style of sensor and a specific film stock, that certainly be something that you could take a look at. We have, to my knowledge, we haven't looked into sending these out to Phase 1 to then wrap up into the Capture One cultural heritage software. This is something that we worked on with Julie, and we worked on with National Geographic, and we're sharing them on their behalf because Julie and the rest of the Nat Geo team have been so gracious to let us share them with everybody. So we make them available for download. Either I think it's actually attached to this chat, but also it's on our website in a blog post regarding Julie's process too. So that's pretty much, I think, where we would keep that is just kind of out and available for everybody to just grab from our website instead. Not really a scanning question per se. However, can you see a need to shoot film again due to the rise of deep fakes?
Oh, that's a fun question.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I can tell you, man, an interesting idea. So I can tell you as an archivist and as someone who is part of a team who we're not just doing, our archival analog digitization, we're doing that, but we're also looking at how we ingest born digital stuff as well, because the society is still, giving grants, grantees take images. Those are part of the grants that we'll eventually ingest. So, of course, that is a concern that we have too. So I can tell you that I believe it's the policy of the society that the photographers submit everything in RAW, so we can tell, so that they can be evaluated, those images can be evaluated, and they know that they're not being altered. So if that kind of answers the question, at least for us as an organization, about the deepfakes, that's how they address that nowadays.
That is an awesome question. Thanks,
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Dave. Cool question.
Yeah. Okay, Ria asks, so 400 to 500 per day being your sort of throughput, does that include post-processing or not?
That all depends. So we have our workflow is very case by case depending on the project that we're doing at the time. So we follow DT's recommendations for the most part, I would say, in creating both an object reproduction. So the full frame, you see the whole slide mount, you see the image. You have a standard exposure where everything where all the slides are shot at the same exposure, so you kind of see that variation in densities and everything like that. And you see the object as it looks on a light table, essentially. And then creating a content reproduction where you're kind of clipped into the film scene itself like that. And you're adjusting exposure, doing some white balancing if necessary. How much of that we do for the content reproduction really depends on the project, on how much we have, on what the demand for that is, if scholars are going to be using that immediately. So like if we're, recently we digitized a run of about 3,000 slides shot in Palestine in the 1970s, sorry, Jordan, not Palestine, for a scholar, and we did like a pretty heavy amount of post-processing on all of those because he's using them immediately and like sending them to people to look at for other researchers to examine like textile patterns and stuff like that. So like obviously they need to be able to see everything immediately. Like it's pretty urgent. For some of the space collection stuff, it's not currently in immediate use. So like we would do a little more of a batch process with that where we'd kind of like adjust the exposure in general, like, pick stuff that's kind of exposed the same, do some batch work on it, and go through and like do it a little more quickly, but like with a little less fine tuning. So that doesn't answer your question completely, but it's one of those things that just depends on the project.
All right, so we're gonna try and speed it up just a little bit, but not to skip over anything for sure. But let's see. So we're at, okay, how has the pandemic affected this project?
I'm at my house working on post-processing and spreadsheets right now. So that's, we're out of production at the moment. I think like most people, unfortunately.
But you're still able to access your data some way through a hard drive.
Yeah, still able, we're able to access our data and like do some work from home, but obviously, we're staying safe and isolated.
Nice. Do you do anything to address dust and scratches? Or I can also speak to this in addition to what you have to say.
Yeah, so we try to make sure that the slides are clean when they go on the copy stand, but we don't do a whole lot with the like dust and scratch remediation as part of the object reproduction, because like if the slide is scratched, it's scratched. That's part of the original content. So we want to make sure to keep that at least for the object reproduction. We might clean that up a little bit, if somebody's using it for like a commercial purpose or like educational purpose or something.
Yeah, I think, for capture, it's very easy to just blow dust off with a rocket blower. Scratches are going to be there no matter what. There's a lot of really interesting literature out there about what digital ice will do to an image, and actually really crushes a lot of very fine detail. So most people try and stay away from, automated dust and scratch removal, but because we're working with Julie's working with the DT atom, and just like most of the DT solutions, this is transmitted light through the film with a very diffuse light box. And I'll kind of double this with the question, which kind of light box do you use? Nat Geo is using the Digital Transitions LED photon, which is a high CQS, CRI, visible spectrum LED light source. When you use a very diffuse light box, and the photon specifically is, the body itself is about 7-8 inches deep. When you have that diffuse light source that is then going and traveling another couple inches up to the film, you have a much softer rendering of the grain that is more true to the film grain itself. You're not using a collimated light source like you might find in the scanner. So you have, it's almost filling in the scratches and sort of doesn't show the dust quite as easily as you might see with a scanner, just given the nature and the quality of that light. It's like taking an enlarger and just flipping it on its head, in essence. So, all right, what settings do you use for best and fastest cropping of an image, especially a slide or negative?
Slides, I think we've been able to like set the crop and then just like kind of batch apply. Auto crop doesn't seem to like the slides super well in Capture One, at least in my experience. But generally we're able to like to set a crop, you know, depending on if it's landscape or portrait, and then apply it and make our kind of minor adjustments as need be.
Yeah. Okay, how do you flatten slides when you've captured them? Do you photograph the materials in original paper? I think you kind of mentioned that, but I'll let you speak to it.
Yeah. So we do keep everything in the slide mount. We don't want to take it out and risk damaging the object. Once again, this is archival digitization. So the copy stand that we use comes with a film scanning kit. And so there's like a little slide holder that holds, I think, 6 slides. And so you just like pop those in and then you like kind of factory move them down, and then you take them out and then put your next 6 slides in, so they hold them in place pretty nicely.
Yeah, the slide holders that Julie's talking about, the DT slide holders, the mechanics of it is very similar to, if you've ever seen like a slide duplicator, there's a couple like very low tension little plastic springs that clip down the sides of the slide mount and hold it in a very, very small indentation so that it's flat.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. What about negatives? Do you have matching negatives for your positives, and do you digitize these as well? Or is one preferred over the other?
So if you mean negatives in regards to like our black and white prints or our color prints, yes. So for the slides are generally just the slides, and then they use those to make the prints of the magazine. But we do have black and white negatives in some cases, as well as black and white prints. Where we have the negatives, we do try to digitize the negatives just because, you know, they're more informationally complete. That being said, a lot of our earlier negatives were on nitrate, and in the 1970s, they destroyed a lot of them. So our building wouldn't, you know, spontaneously combust. I think most of us know nitrate was a very unstable type of film. Right now, something that we're working on is trying to get a lot of our negatives with the vinegar syndrome digitized. So we have a decent amount of those to get through. So those are currently in cold storage to really slow that process of degradation. But yeah, so short answer is yes, when we have negatives that match the positives, we are trying to digitize the negatives as well.
Okay. Do you have measured, or at least visually compare, the original Kodak Kodachrome target to the LaserSoft target?
We don't have one, so no. If we did have one, that would be great. I would love to be able to profile that as well, see what the differences were. If you have one, let me know. If you want to bring it to DC, we would love that. But yeah, as of yet, we haven't been able to do that now.
All right. Christian asks, have you used X-Rite color charts for targeting and profiling?
I think that's what our reflective profile is, right? The X-Rite color checker.
Yep.
Do you remember?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
We use the color checker SG for the reflective color profiling.
Yep.
All right.
Okay.
Greg asks, National Geographic ran their own processing lines for more consistent process control?
Yeah, so like a historical processing
Yeah,
question.
just to
Yes.
clarify, I think what you may have touched on earlier.
Yeah, they had their own development lab. So that's how they did that for many years.
Yeah. Let's see. Just jumping back on that colored chart, we used the X-Rite chart, I think, for that process, but that was prior to the DT next generation target that was we released that in around October or so of last year. So it would be very interesting to see the results there, just with the expanded near neutrals and the heritage patches on that target.
Yeah, that'd be really cool, especially since we have a lot of gelatin silver prints. So we have a lot of like very glossy darks. So like custom profiling really helped capture those. I would love to see, what the next gen target could do.
Yeah, and we will be doing another one of these Project Lemonades in the coming weeks about creating in situ profiles for reflective objects, and in that I'll be talking about the next generation target, just sort of what that does and how it relates to color profiling and accuracy. So if anyone's curious about different targets and stuff, be on the lookout for that webinar coming up next week.
Okay.
Is there any transmissive target you would recommend to assess camera calibration and configuration prior to imaging? The ISA target, the Image Science Associates transmissive target set is I think what I would use there, to basically ensure that your camera is parallel, that you're getting good sharpness across the entire image, that you are doing good tone scale reproduction, linear tonal reproduction, and that your reproduction scale is also accurate. I would use those Image Science Associates targets. Judy, also, this was related, I think, to Roel's question, which is your working space that you process out to Adobe RGB.
Right.
Right?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we do all of our post stuff in RAW, so we do use a RAW workflow. But yeah, our working in archival spaces, Adobe RGB.
Yeah.
Yep.
What resolution do you capture each slide at?
4,000. Yeah, so 4,000 for each slide, and then we preserve in TIFF, and then we have like a access JPEG. So
yeah.
Sorry to kind of combine those two.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Which file format do you preserve your images with? TIFF, and then the JPEG for the access. Great.
All right. Got through it.
Okay. I'll stop sharing.
All right. Thanks, everybody. It's great to talk to all of you.
Let me just throw this back at Wayne. Just I think he had some closing remarks to say.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Spencer.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Spencer, you have that last slide you can throw up for me?
Yes, I do.
Okay, great. I hope Julie's still listening. That one after that, perfect. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. First and foremost, please be safe out there, and take care of yourselves and your families. If you have any questions that you wanted to still get answers on, please contact us on the information on the screen. Furthermore, I want to thank so much Julie and Renee from National Geographic, and also for Spencer for providing the web support here. I do want to acknowledge that next week, Thursday, Spencer will be providing the ICC profiling webinar. Also, we have other webinars happening, so stay in touch, stay in tune, come to our website and check out what's going on. Again, have a great day, be safe, and we'll see you all soon. Kate, I'm going to throw this back over to you, and thank you, Kate, for everything that you've done.
All right. And thank you, Julie.
Yes.